Immigrants and refugees come to Canada looking for a new life. But some of them find that their first stop in the country is a detention facility. A joint campaign by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International hopes to stop that. With us to explain, in the nation's capital, Ketty Nivyabandi, Secretary General of Amnesty International Canada. And in the downtown core of the provincial capital, Samer Muscati, Associate Director of Disability Rights Division of Human Rights Watch. And we're delighted to welcome the two of you to our program tonight for an important conversation about something I suspect many people know very little about. So let's start, Ketty, with you if we can. Tell us what the Welcome to Canada campaign aims to achieve.
Thanks, Steve. Well, when you think about it, Canada is really known around the world as a welcoming country, welcoming to refugees. And the idea is that it's very welcoming to immigrants in general. So we wanted, and that's why the phrase, the catchphrase of our campaign is Welcome to Canada. We wanted to challenge that assertion and that belief with this absolutely appalling reality, which is what immigrants experience when they do come to Canada. The immigration detention system violates the human rights of those who come to this country seeking refuge and seeking safety, and it is absolutely reprehensible. And our campaign aims to spotlight it, make sure that Canadians are aware of it, and ultimately abolish it simply because it has no place in a human rights respecting country.
Samer, do I have this right, that this campaign is actually aimed at the provinces as opposed to the federal government?
That's right. So we're obviously still advocating with the federal government to end these practices, but at the same time, with the campaign, we're highlighting the complicity of provincial governments in this scheme by allowing detainees to be held in provincial facilities, and more than 70, in fact, across the country. And people really don't know about immigration detention and know even less that this is happening in their backyards in provincial facilities across Canada.
Samer, let me just follow up on that word that you used, complicity. So you are saying, I guess, in essence, that you think the provinces and the feds are in on this together in a nefarious way. Do I have that right?
Absolutely. This is one of the challenges that we have in immigration detention in Canada, is that people who are detained on immigration law are really stuck in the worst of two worlds, with no one accepting responsibility. On the one hand, we have the federal immigration authorities denying accountability for what happens in immigration detention centers and in provincial jails, because managing these prisons are within the authority of provincial correctional authorities. But at the same time, these provincial authorities deny accountability for what happens to immigration detainees, because the decision to detain is made by federal immigration authorities. So in the end, immigration detainees are abandoned and punished by two levels of government at enormous cost to their mental health, to their relationships, and to their families.
All right, Ketty, let's focus on one province in particular here, and that's actually British Columbia. Let's go out west. The Government of Canada and the Government of British Columbia recently announced something regarding immigration detention, and I wonder if you could bring us up to speed on what that's all about.
Indeed. So just as Samir was explaining, these detainees are detained in provincial jails, and British Columbia happens to be one of those provinces. So our campaign started really targeting the province of British Columbia. We've met with the British Columbia authorities and brought these realities to their attention and called for the end of that complicity that Samir was just pointing out. And we're very pleased that the British Columbia authorities have decided to review the agreement that they have with the federal government and with the CBSA. The announcement has been made formally. The review is set to happen by the spring, and we're really hoping that by the end of the review, what British Columbia will do is make the decision to cut ties with this practice and really set the tone for the other provinces across the country to follow suit and to disengage from this practice.
How long do they want to review this situation?
Well, we expect the end of the review by the end of the spring. We should have conclusions of that review, and we're very hopeful. And we call really on British Columbia authorities to disengage fully from that practice.
Okay, Samer, in which case that's BC. How about Ontario? When do you plan to bring the campaign here?
So we're on to Quebec right now and pushing the Quebec government to hopefully do a review and to cancel their contract as well. And we're hoping to be in Ontario after the provincial election is happening in June or around June. So once we have a new provincial government, expect us to be here advocating for this province to do the same.
I was going to say, you know, it's unlikely in the next 4 months that anybody's going to get any attention for anything that doesn't relate to re-electing the current government or putting another government in place. So that's why you're holding off for now. Is that right?
Exactly. Just because we want this issue to have the attention that it deserves, and with the new government, we hope that they'll have a new mandate to sort of take on this important issue.
Okay. Ketty just mentioned CBSA, the Canadian Border Service Agency, and we did reach out to them to get them involved in this program in the hopes that a representative would join us tonight. They declined, which is their right, but they did send us this statement, and I want to read you this statement, and then we'll pick this apart a little bit. The Canada Border Services Agency, CBSA, has shared a long and collaborative relationship with the province, who house within their provincial correctional facilities persons detained under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, IRPA. The use of provincial correctional facilities for immigration detention is a measure of last resort that allows both the province and the CBSA to manage the fair treatment of detainees while ensuring the safety of Canadians when risks cannot be mitigated through other means, such as alternatives to detention. And they also provided us with some numbers as well. This is as of January 27th, this year. In provincial correctional facilities, there are 111 detainees, and in immigration holding centers, there are 101, for a total of 212. Samar, why don't you start off on this? You heard the conditions under which they say they implement this program with provincial correctional facilities. What's your reaction to that?
You know, it's disappointing. It's obviously nice to see that the numbers have come down. Pre-pandemic, what we saw was almost 9,000 people are actually detained across the country in immigration holding centers and prisons. And the fact that the government has reduced the numbers to this extent shows that, we don't need to have immigration detention. This is not being used as a last resort. The sky hasn't fallen. So I think we're at a crossroads right now where really there's an opportunity to continue with the gains that have been made in terms of seeing such a sharp reduction in detention. But our fear, of course, is that business will go back to business as usual, and in the coming months, once the pandemic sort of stops. So it's of great concern to us. This is at the end of the day an industry. There's CBSA is receiving millions of dollars in the last federal budget. I think the federal government allotted $650 million over 5 years to CBSA. So they're expanding their scope and their powers. And on the other hand, we have migrants and refugee claimants with few resources who are bearing the brunt of this very repressive regime. When we talk about immigration detention, we're not talking about people who are being held at the Hilton or at the Four Seasons. These are people who are being held in jails and correctional facilities, oftentimes, with no end in sight. And the conditions they face are horrific. If you can imagine, we just had another death in custody of CBSA 11 days ago in Quebec at an immigration holding center. And, no information has been released. We don't know this person's name. We don't know this person's age, whether they had a family. These abuses are happening in the dark, and it's the only way that they can happen if CBSA, is able to do what they do. We need to dehumanize the people in detention for them to sort of, for them to be detained. So it's really, it's unfortunate that we have the statement from CBSA that sort of points again to safety and to risk, because that sort of really is not reflected by the numbers of why people are held in immigration detention. We have statistics that we indicate in our report from CBSA that indicates 93% of people are not held for safety on safety grounds.
Well, let me just follow up with Ketty on something here, because our chart that we just put up showed 212, and then I just heard Samar say 9,000. So those numbers are not close together. Help us understand, Ketty, what the story is there.
We're talking about the number of detainees per year. So cumulatively, we were looking at close to 9,000 by 2019 to 2020. And the number that we have, and we know that CBSA has released a large number of detainees throughout the pandemic. So these are the current actual numbers. I did want to add something to what Samir just mentioned, which
Please.
is really the fact that the vast majority, as he pointed out, do not represent a serious risk to the public. So the statement that was shared by CBSA is not accurate in that sense. We know that only about 1% of that number represents a serious risk. So there is no reason to detain these people under these circumstances. The other really important factor to keep in mind is that there is no length of time determined for these detentions. And Canada is actually one of the only global north countries which doesn't have a limited time for immigration detention. This means that these people could be held in those conditions indefinitely for years. And actually our report has pointed out that people of color in particular, racialized people and Black people in particular, tend to be held for much, much longer time. So there's several really problematic layers and really overarching layers of human rights violations that are occurring in the system and that need to be urgently overhauled.
Can you tell us, Ketty, what a typical amount of time in these centers tends to be?
This varies. We do not know why and on what basis. This time lengths are set, and again, this goes back to the very important question of monitoring. CBSA is the only agency that does not have an independent civilian oversight to really monitor its mandate and the exercise of its powers, which makes it really difficult to hold it to account. And which really is the purpose of this campaign. And it's one of our core recommendations, actually, is that we establish an independent civilian oversight over the CBSA to look into these issues. But broader than that, what we're really calling for is to gradually abolish this practice. It has no room in a country like Canada, in a human rights abiding country. We really call for that to be overhauled fully, and we're hoping that it starts at the province level, and we're able to hold CBSA directly to account, and then we can gradually abolish this in Canada.
One more follow-up with you, Ketty, because I'm trying to understand why anybody would need to be held to do what? What exactly do they need to be held for?
Often they're held and they're waiting for several steps, right, in the process. So they need to have a hearing. They need to have several processes in place. This can be delayed without known reasons, and so they end up being lost in the system in the process for that very long period of time. And they are often isolated. They are often, sometimes they are held in solitary confinement, or as we said earlier, in maximum security prisons without contact with family members or loved ones. Those are really cruel conditions. And you're right to ask yourself that question. There is no reason why they should be held in those centers. It does not make sense. I would urge us, rather than to try to make sense of it, actually call for that to change and to be repelled. The other aspect that I didn't mention is the fact that children as well are detained, have been detained as well. We know that up to 138 children were detained in the year 2019 to 2020, which is appalling, which has a majority of them being between 6 and 17 years old.
Would they be separated from their parents, or are they allowed to stay with their parents?
Well, it's very unclear. We're not able to know that because the federal government doesn't track that data and doesn't make it available to us to review. And we also do not have access to these centers as well, which is one of the calls that we made. You need to know that Canada hasn't signed the optional protocol on torture that would enable organizations like ours and others to be visiting these centers. So this is a crucial point as well.
Okay. Samar, some basic facts I think we need to bring into this as well. Who makes the determination that somebody, be they an immigrant, a refugee, a permanent resident, whatever, who makes the determination that they need to go to a provincial correctional facility or an immigration holding center, whatever?
So this is the Canada Border Service Agency. CBSA makes that determination, and the initial determination to detain also falls with the CBSA officer, and it could be an officer who's just having a bad day that decides, you know what, this person poses a flight risk, or we can't identify their documents, so into detention you go. And once they're in detention, it's a very difficult process to navigate and to get out of, as Ketty was describing.
And is there an appeal if you don't like that decision?
So every 30 days, in the process, people are supposed to have an immigration review hearing, detention review hearing, and at that point, people have an opportunity to sort of bring in new evidence. Oftentimes, it's very difficult, especially if people are awaiting documents from a war-torn country. It's very difficult to sort of try to retrieve those once you're in a detention facility. So
right. And do they have their own lawyers, or do they represent themselves, or how does that work?
Some of them have lawyers, and one sort of interesting feature of our immigration detention system is for people who have mental health conditions. It's actually quite alarming, because in those situations, they may not necessarily make decisions themselves. They're given what's called designated representatives, which in effect represent the detainee, has the power to make substitute decision making on behalf of the detainee, which again is a fundamental sort of contradiction of what the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities pushes for. So there's a lot of anomalies in the system that really sort of require us to examine it and to have a paradigm shift away from detention.
Sure. Let me get another distinction from you here. I think people watching or listening to this have a pretty good sense about what a provincial correctional facility is. Jail. I think we get jail. But an immigrant holding center, what does that look like?
So that looks like a jail. It's just if you have a plague, if you have some trees in the middle, people are still held in jail. We call them jail-like facilities. Essentially, they're locked up. Their movements are restricted. They can be held in solitary. They can't bring in cell phones. Their connection to the outside world is essentially severed, and they have to follow the routines and regulations of the holding center. They can't leave. So you can call it what you want, but it's still a jail at the end of the day.
Okay, and Ketty, how does an agent determine whether somebody ought to go to a provincial correctional facility or an immigration holding center?
Well, that's a determination that's made in unclear terms. There are formal arrangements with the provinces. There are also informal arrangements, which is really why our campaign has really focused on the province level. It depends on the capacity that CBSA has to hold these detainees in these immigration holding centers. But as Samir rightly pointed out, it also is a business, in the sense that the provinces receive a certain amount of a fee for every detainee that they hold, and therefore it has become a lucrative business for a number of these provinces. But the decision remains quite arbitrary from our perspective. It's not clear, and what's important to keep in mind is that they're then detained in, as you said earlier, maximum security jails with other criminals, people convicted for criminal acts, when they simply came to this country looking for a safer life. You can imagine the trauma that this induces on these individuals. By the time that they eventually even come out of these detention centers and jails, they are broken. They're truly broken. The people that we've interviewed in the course of this report have shown deep long-lasting trauma, pain, and often even disabilities as well.
So can I just be clear about this? Are you saying that the provinces, in effect, are making money off of this system, and therefore they've kind of got a built-in conflict of interest if you're asking them to end it, because if they're making money on it, why would they end it?
They should end it because it's a violation of human rights. It's as simple as that. They should end it because it's the wrong thing to do, and we're really hoping that by bringing this to their attention and having these conversations, that we make them reassess the reason why they've engaged in these processes in the first place.
Okay. Samer, tell me this. These are both congregate care settings, right? Provincial correctional institutions or immigration holding centers. They're congregate care settings, which means they have a much higher likelihood of somebody catching COVID-19 there than in the general population. I guess my question for you is, do you know whether COVID is a problem among this group of people?
Yes, absolutely. And that's exactly why the authorities have released so many immigration detainees during the pandemic. And you showed the figures earlier. That explains why there's such a few number in these holding centers and detention centers now. But again, that sort of explains to us that clearly detention is not being used as a last resort. They've released hundreds, if not thousands of people, and the sky hasn't fallen. So we want to sort of build on that momentum now that COVID has presented this opportunity. There's been hunger strikes in these facilities with people sort of worried about their health, worried about their safety during COVID. It absolutely has been a concern for many of these detainees. And we hope that nobody has to go through what they have gone through.
In our remaining moments here, Ketty, let me get you to weigh in on whether you think there's a better alternative. If it can't be a provincial jail cell, if it can't be an immigration holding center, where's a better place for these people to wait while they have their cases adjudicated?
Mm-hmm. Well, building on what Samir just said, it's actually begun. We have seen a number of these detainees released because of the pandemic, and they have been brought out to the general public. There are alternatives. There are community-based alternatives that would support these detainees without having them spending the time in jail or being overly surveilled. It is important to work with communities who work on these issues, who support immigration detainees and immigrants in general, to work with them to design solutions that function and that are community-based. That really is what we're encouraging both the federal government and the provinces to do. These alternatives exist, and we must keep creating them and resourcing them to be able to do what needs to be done.
Samer, are there actually, families who would be happy to host some of these people while they wait for their cases to be rendered?
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen how many people have stepped up to sort of support Syrian families when the call was made for people to come here. There's absolutely, as Ketty mentioned, so many alternatives. And I believe if Canadians knew what is happening, they would be astonished and would step up to say this shouldn't happen in our name and step up to help these families. Ultimately, I think what we need is a paradigm shift to abolish the system. It's a defining feature of immigration detention is that it inflicts cruelty and it dehumanizes people on such a scale that it no longer feels cruel or dehumanizing. And I think that, the more that we shine a light on this and we take it out of the shadows, the more that Canadians will be appalled and will join us in calling for changes and supporting people so that they don't have to go through this horrible process.
Ketty, in my last 20 seconds here, I presume you've had a meeting with the minister responsible for all of this?
We have had meetings with provincial authorities. We have not met with the minister, the federal minister, yet. We have shared our reports, and we are awaiting their feedback. And we keep hoping that we'll be able to meet with them and bring this to their attention.
That's Ketty Nivyabandi, Amnesty International Canada, Samer Muscati, Associate Director, Disability Rights Division, Human Rights Watch. We're grateful to both of you for putting this on our radar screens tonight here on TVO. Many thanks.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Steve.
you. Thank you, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.